Chevrolet made its most prized and exotic car engine. Insanely expensive, powerful, an ultimate rarity with unquestionable performance. Yet it was the first time in automotive history that the factory had to take back 30 cars returned by the dealership because almost no one could afford them. Born in the shadows of drag racing battlefields, the ZL1 All-Aluminum V8 came alive in the time of the biggest muscle car wars and rifts. Ford had the Mustang. Chrysler had the mighty Hemi. Jim Hall's Chaparral Can-Am engine was dominating drag racing. But Chevrolet? They were about to unleash something no one saw coming. This is the untold story of the rarest and most expensive iteration of the ZL1 All-Aluminum V8 engine. An exotic powerhouse that was forged in secrecy, lived as an outlaw, and disappeared before it could even leave its mark. Only 69 were ever built. Fewer than 50 survive today, and if you find one, you'll pay up to $1 million for the privilege. But here's what Chevrolet doesn't want you to know. This engine was never supposed to reach the streets. It was a racing engine smuggled through corporate loopholes by two men who refused to accept defeat in America's muscle car wars. The muscle car battlefield. To understand why the ZL1 exists, we need to go back to 1968. The peak of America's muscle car wars. Detroit's Big Three weren't just competing for sales, they were fighting for the soul of American performance. The late 1960s, known as the muscle car era, or as many like to call it, the golden age of the American car industry, an era of powerful, high-performance muscle cars. Detroit's Big Three were throwing everything they had into the muscle car wars. Ford had just introduced the Boss 429 to counter Chrysler's 426 Hemi dominance. The 426 Hemi engine, widely used in Mopar vehicles and also in drag racing, was developed by Chrysler and became a legendary power plant. It was known for its high horsepower and torque. The Boss 429 was created by Ford to compete with the Hemi in racing and homologation for NASCAR. It was initially called the Camaro before becoming the Boss 429. Chevy didn't need to directly answer the Hemi, but they did develop big block engines like the 454, which were intended to compete with the 426 Hemi and the Boss 429. Mopar loyalists swore by the Super Bee and the Roadrunner. Detroit's Big Three were locked in a high-stakes battle for supremacy on both the street and the racetrack. The cars weren't just vehicles. They represented status, innovation, and revolution on four wheels. Meanwhile, Chevrolet was watching from the sidelines, handcuffed by their own corporate policies and under pressure to produce something explosive. It started, not at GM headquarters, but in a small dealership in Illinois, by two men who would change everything. Meet Fred Gibb, a Chevrolet dealer with a wild idea, and Dick Harrell, known for his work on modifying, tuning, and racing bowtie cars. Fred Gibb wasn't your typical car dealer. He was a racer at heart, spending his weekends at drag strips, studying the competition, and growing increasingly frustrated. He is remembered for his foresight and tenacity in his role as the instigator of the COPO muscle cars. He said that he was tired of seeing Cobra Jet Mustangs and Hemi darts beating up on Camaros. According to his wife, Helen Gibb, Fred started going to racetracks all the time, studying all the cars and racers. It was during this time that Fred Gibb noticed that Chevrolets were at a distinct disadvantage in the automatic classes. In fact, Cobra Jet Mustangs and Hemi darts were consistently beating up on Camaros. In NHRA's automatic transmission classes, there were literally zero Nova competitors. Not because the cars weren't capable, but because Chevrolet's top dog L78 396 engine wasn't available with an auto in 1968. So, Gibb started a dialogue with Chevrolet's Vince Piggins with the idea of ordering some auto-equipped deuces. Meanwhile, Dick Harrell was also a renowned racing champion, setting records all over the wheel of Chevrolet cars that he had substantially modified. When General Motors discontinued its racing support in the mid-1960s, many racers abandoned Chevrolet in favor of alternatives from Ford and Chrysler. But Harrell continued. This commitment earned Harrell the nickname that would stick with him, Mr. Chevrolet. Together, they set out to cheat the system. As an answer to the market-dominating Mustang and Hemi, Fred Gibb and Dick Harrell decided to build the Camaro that would accommodate Chevrolet's new all-aluminum ZL1 engine ahead of the 1970 NHRA Superstock drag racing. a highly ambitious project that packed the most horsepower available at the time into a fairly basic package. The ban and COPO loophole. The truth is, such a powerhouse wasn't supposed to reach the streets. General Motors had a rule, but Gibb and Harrell didn't play by the rules. Earlier, Gibb had even worked with Vince Piggins, Chevrolet's performance guru, to create a special batch of L78 396 Novas with automatic transmissions using something called COPO. So the ZL1 All-Aluminum V8 was a rule breaker from the start. General Motors had a policy that prohibited its divisions from using engines larger than 400 cubic inches in mid-size cars, with an exception for the Chevrolet Corvette. The memo also included a directive to discontinue support for racing programs. This ban was a significant factor in shaping the muscle car landscape of the time. There were speculations that the action was a simple solution to GM's fear of being broken up over antitrust concerns. However, there was no conclusive evidence proving this. Not even the domination of the V8 impressed the General Motors executives enough to lift the arbitrary big engine ban in time for the muscle car craze of the 1990s. Chevrolet had both the ZL1 427 and the 427 Tri-Power V8 engines, which were good for 425 to 435 horsepower, but were not allowed to put them in either the Camaro or the Chevelle. Fred made several trips to Detroit to convince the Chevrolet division to install the aluminum 427 ZL1 engine in the Camaro. He was particularly keen on the horsepower per cubic inch ratio and the weight advantages that it would offer. He felt that combination would be ideal for drag racing. At the time, he knew that Chevrolet fully intended on installing that engine in the Corvette, but had no other plans for it. Fred was close friends with Chevrolet's Vince Piggins, and since the Chevy 2 program had gone over so well, he thought they could work together once more. Gibb's idea was to stuff the all-aluminum ZL1 427, which weighed over 100 pounds less than an iron big block, to give the Camaro a weight balance advantage on the drag strip. His intention for the cars? The super stock competition. Dick Harrell and Gibb exploited the company's Central Order Production Office to birth a low-volume, special order. Central Office Production Order was a program that allowed dealers to request specific configurations for vehicles that weren't standard on the regular production order list. Think of it as a backdoor way to order cars that didn't exist on the regular option list. Dealers could use COPO to order vehicles with specific engine options, transmissions, and other performance upgrades. If a certain mix of regular production options weren't offered on a particular model, then a Central Office Production Order, COPO, was submitted. And if the mix was approved by engineering, then a COPO number was issued, and the order for production was placed. Gibb utilized this Central Office Production Order, COPO system, to build a high-performance Camaro not offered through regular production. Engineering. Perfection. What really made the ZL1 special wasn't just that it was all aluminum, it was how purpose-built it was for track use. Let's start with the block itself. The aluminum alloy was hand-selected for its strength-to-weight ratio and thermal efficiency, but aluminum alone isn't strong enough for the stresses of a high-performance engine, so Chevrolet engineers inserted cast-iron cylinder sleeves retained with precise grooves at the top of the block. The main bearing bulkheads were significantly beefed up compared to the iron version, and many of the bolt holes and stud threads throughout the engine were lengthened for greater clamping strength. This wasn't just a weight-saving exercise, it was a complete re-engineering of the 427. Inside the engine, everything screamed racing. The connecting rods were forged steel, thicker in both the caps and shank base, with larger 7/16" rod bolts instead of the standard 3/8" pieces. The pistons were forged aluminum with full floating pins. Things got even more interesting with the camshaft. This wasn't a mild street cam. It was a radical solid lifter grind with massive overlap, designed specifically for high RPM operation. The duration and lift figures were so aggressive that the engine would barely idle at 800 RPM. The heads featured open-chamber combustion designs that allowed better airflow at high RPMs, and the intake manifold was a high-rise dual-plane design cast in aluminum. Some of the bolt holes and stud threads were longer too, for greater clamping strength. The ZL1's use of aluminum was a significant step forward in engine design. It demonstrated that lighter engine components could lead to substantial performance gains without sacrificing durability, making it a landmark engine for performance enthusiasts. The 1968 ZL1 All-Aluminum V8 was considered an overkill for street use primarily due to its extreme horsepower and weight, leading to a high cost and a focus on performance rather than everyday drivability. Now here's where Chevrolet got creative with the truth. Officially, they rated the ZL1 at 430 horsepower at 5,200 RPM and 450 pound-feet of torque at 4,400 RPM. But anyone who experienced one of these engines knew those numbers were complete fiction. According to automotive historian Fran Preve, who had access to original dyno sheets, the real numbers were staggering. 585 horsepower at 6,400 RPM with 510 pound-feet of torque at 4,800 RPM. Some modern dyno tests have confirmed these engines were severely underrated, with actual output closer to 550 horsepower in stock trim. And that's all in an engine weighing about the same as a 327 small block. Why the deception? Insurance companies and safety regulators were already scrutinizing high-performance cars. By understating the power output, Chevrolet could fly under the radar while delivering genuine supercar performance. Gibb and Harrell developed the COPO package that would place the ZL1 in a Camaro to qualify it for the 1969 NHRA season. They knew the 150-pound weight savings of the ZL1 would make the Camaro competitive against the Hemi. To meet the rulebook requirement for the American Hot Rod Association, Gibb ordered 50 of these cars, making the ZL1 a competition-ready, high-performance vehicle. A sales disaster, Gibb placed the first COPO 9560 order for 50 ZL1 Camaros with high expectations, and had satisfaction that it would get to qualify for NHRA drag racing. He also anticipated paying around $400 for the engine upgrade. What he got instead was a shocking invoice that would change everything. Chevrolet hit him with a bill for $4,160 per engine, not $4,160 for the whole car, $4,160 just for the engine option. In 1969 dollars, that's equivalent to about $35,000 today. For context, you could buy a brand new Corvette for less money. The final sticker price for each ZL1 Camaro, over $7,200. In today's money, that's approximately $60,000. No dealer anywhere could have handled that kind of cost for a limited sales product. Gibb was stunned. There was no way his dealership could finance 50 cars at that price point, and there certainly wasn't a market for a $7,200 Camaro. He felt ambushed by Chevrolet, having risked his dealership's reputation and resources on what he thought would be a reasonable performance upgrade. The first two ZL1 Camaros arrived at Gibb's dealership on December 31, 1968, painted in dusk blue. Car number 1 immediately went to Dick Harrell for preparation as a race car. Car number 2 briefly served as a demonstrator before being sold, but the remaining cars sat on the lot like expensive paperweights. Despite their incredible performance potential, the sticker shock was too much for most buyers. Gibb had no choice but to negotiate with Chevrolet to return 37 of the unsold cars, an unprecedented move in automotive history. Out of desperation, Gibb and Harrell sent many of the remaining cars to performance shops where they were sold under private contracts to serious racers who understood their true value. The ZL1 Camaros were scattered to the winds, many ending up in the hands of racers who cared more about quarter-mile times than preservation. Some had their engines pulled for other racing applications while the bodies were scrapped. Others were modified so extensively that returning them to their original condition became impossible. The result is that fewer than 50 original ZL1 Camaros are accounted for today. But the damage was done. Chevrolet's most exotic muscle car had become a commercial failure. This failure would ultimately create one of the most legendary and valuable collector cars in history. Legacy and rarity. Today, While the ZL1 failed commercially, it proved its worth on the drag strip in spectacular fashion. It made history as a world champion drag racing legend, and its status as #1 in the ZL1 lineage of classic COPO Camaros. Dick Harrell immediately prepared car #1 for AHRA Superstock competition. The results were immediate and devastating to the competition. In Superstock trim, Gibb's ZL1 recorded a 10.33-second quarter mile at 133 miles per hour, numbers that put it in the same league as purpose-built race cars. When Superstock magazine tested the car in February 1969, it turned 10.41 seconds at 128.10 miles per hour with the stock Holley 850 carburetor. With dual 660 Holleys on a weigh-in tunnel ram intake, that dropped to 10.29 seconds, numbers that were simply unheard of for a factory-built car. The ZL1 was no garage king. It earned its stripes. The aluminum block allowed racers to push further without weight penalties. It went head-to-head with Hemi Darts, Boss Mustangs, and even factory-sponsored Mopars. Time after time, the ZL1 punched above its weight. Let's put this in perspective. Ford's Boss 429 Mustang, while impressive on paper, felt sluggish off the line compared to the ZL1. The weight distribution was all wrong, and the engine's power curve didn't suit drag racing applications. Chrysler's 426 Hemi had brute force in spades, but it was heavy, really heavy. In a straight-line acceleration contest, the ZL1's superior power-to-weight ratio consistently proved the difference. The ZL1? It was finesse, speed, and revolution rolled into one aluminum shell. It was a lightweight engine with the raw power of a big block. While other manufacturers were throwing cubic inches and weight at the problem, Chevrolet had achieved the perfect balance of power and agility. In 1971, the original Gibb Harrell car was converted to the new AHRA Pro Stock rules and driven by Jim Hayter. The results? An AHRA Pro Stock record of 9.63 seconds at 143 miles per hour and championships in both Superstock and Pro Stock divisions. The ZL1 had proven that engineering excellence could triumph over brute force, but by then, it was too late to matter commercially. The ZL1's racing success came at the worst possible time for American muscle cars. By 1970, insurance companies had declared war on high-performance vehicles, with premiums for young drivers reaching astronomical levels. Safety regulators were breathing down Detroit's neck, and emission standards were tightening every year. General Motors saw the writing on the wall. The muscle car era was ending, and exotic, high-performance engines like the ZL1 had no place in the new automotive landscape. Production ended after just 1 year, making the '69 ZL1 Camaros instant collector items. The ZL1 might have been too expensive and exotic for its time, but it represented everything American performance engineering could achieve when cost was no object. The aluminum big block technology wouldn't appear in mainstream applications for another 2 decades. Today, every high-performance engine uses aluminum construction. What seemed impossibly exotic in 1969 is now standard practice. The ZL1 was simply 20 years ahead of its time. In today's collector car market, finding an original ZL1 Camaro is like discovering buried treasure. Pristine examples routinely sell for $500,000 to $1 million at auction, with documented racing cars commanding even higher prices. What makes these cars so valuable isn't just their rarity, it's their historical significance. The ZL1 represents the absolute peak of first-generation Camaro performance, a time when American manufacturers were willing to build cars that prioritized performance over practicality, cost, or even sales success. Original owner testimonials tell the story best. As one ZL1 owner, Barnhart, put it, "That car is one of the loves of my life. It's unique, different. Like it says on the car, it's something else." Chevrolet recognized the significance of the ZL1 name, reviving it in 2012 for the 5th-generation Camaro and continuing it through today's 6th-generation car. The modern ZL1 produces over 650 horsepower and can run the quarter mile in under 11 seconds, impressive numbers that would have seemed impossible in 1969. But while the modern car is undoubtedly faster, more refined, and more capable, it lacks the raw, uncompromising character of the original. Today's ZL1 is designed to be a daily driver that happens to be incredibly fast. The 1969 version was a race car that happened to be street legal. The story of the ZL1 Camaro is ultimately about vision, passion, and the willingness to take risks. Fred Gibb and Dick Harrell saw what Chevrolet could accomplish if freed from corporate constraints, and they found a way to make it happen. For collectors lucky enough to own one of the surviving ZL1 Camaros, they possess more than just a rare car. They own a piece of American automotive history. The ZL1 may have been Chevrolet's secret, but its legacy is written in the DNA of every high-performance car that followed. It stands as proof that sometimes the best ideas come from passionate individuals willing to challenge the system. Camaro ZL1s became legends in their own time. Chevrolet recognized that, and even used the engine and ZL1 name on a couple of second-generation show cars. Chevrolet revived the ZL1 name in 2012 as a new high-performance variant of the fifth-generation Camaro. The new 6th-gen model ups the ante with more power and lighter weight architecture, offering capability on par or exceeding the world's highest-performing sports coupes. Unlike the originals, this one was developed to perform on a road course as well as the drag strip. Today, the 1969 ZL1 Camaro is more than a muscle car. It is a whispered legend among gearheads and collectors. If you're lucky enough to find a genuine ZL1 Camaro in original or restored condition, expect to pay at least $500,000, sometimes up to $1 million at auction. Only 69 units were ever made, and fewer than 50 are accounted for today. Chevrolet's secret ZL1 might have disappeared, but one thing is certain. Owning a real ZL1 would be like holding a piece of automotive history. Not just rare, but revolutionary. What do you think? Was the ZL1 ahead of its time, or exactly what the muscle car era needed? Which muscle car do you think was the real king of the 60s? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this deep dive into the ZL1 story, don't forget to subscribe for more legendary builds and automotive history's most fascinating stories. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.